This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jespersen.
Are you feeling like free? Like, did you wake up today with freedom just coursing through your veins? You're one of those that has freedom tattooed across your chest, your freedom hoodies, your freedom flags flying on the back of your freely purchased Freedom 150. Is this describing you, or do you feel like there's a freedom deficit in Canada? We've been talking a lot about freedom. We've been hearing a lot about freedom over the past few years, prompted obviously by COVID restrictions, but still, today we're going to take on the notion that Canadians just aren't free. Prompted by our leadoff guest every week on this show, Charles Adler, who will join us in just a minute. We'll find out why this was on his radar, why he was tweeting about it over the weekend, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say, Real Talkers, joining us either on the live chat on YouTube or live streaming the audio on the Mixler audio app presented by California Closets. Plus, we're going to check in with a good friend of the show. Erin Davis is going to join us. She's just back from New York City. New York City! Where she was, do you remember the best salsa commercial of all time? The guy sitting around the campfire.
Yeah, of course.
New York City.
NYC.
Well, Erin was a delegate at the United Nations. How cool is that? The Commission on the Status of Women. She's going to talk to us about what they heard there, what they learned, what they were talking about. It doesn't get any bigger than the UN, and this on the heels of, or prompted by, obviously, International Women's Day. This commission running for 2 weeks. It's still going. In fact, she's just back into the capital city here, and she's making time for us. Looking forward to that conversation, which would not be happening without the support of our friends at Rello. They're the presenting sponsor of this episode of Real Talk, and they've got a very simple message for you. That is, if you're unsatisfied or feeling stuck in your career, now is a great time to make a move into real estate. You've seen people that have been making great gains and enjoying progress in real estate careers. They're sitting there and they're all of a sudden realizing that life after the cubicle is a good-looking life. It's a fantastic life. You set your own hours. You have unlimited income potential. Plus, you're helping people buy and sell their homes. Rello has expert instructors that can help you every single step of the way. It's Alberta's top real estate school. You'll find more information online at rello.ca. That's RELO. The best part about it, 20% off any Rello course with the code REALTALK. That's all one word, REALTALK, when you get started today at rello.ca. So I'm cruising my phone over the weekend, as you do from time to time, and I find two of my former terrestrial radio colleagues. One of them, obviously, we still speak with every single week. Award-winning broadcast legend Charles Adler, interacting with Joe McFarland, a pal who we used to do talk radio with back in the day. Joe's at a hockey game standing for the national anthem, and a lady behind him mutters, "Yeah, right," after the line, "The true north strong and free." It prompted a tweet from Joe. It prompted a response from Charles Adler, and here we are asking about it today. Chuck, welcome to the show. Hope you had a great weekend. Nice to see your face.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. Always a pleasure being the warm-up act for Alberta's beautiful people. That's what I'm here for every Monday, sometimes Tuesday, if Ryan and his family take off for Jasper on the long weekend.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's always about 20 or 30 minutes with me warming up beautiful people like Naheed Nenshi. I had Nenshi last week, and, of course, the beautiful person coming back from New York City.
New York City. You remember that salsa commercial, right?
Of course.
Yeah, that was. I don't remember the name. I think it was Pace Pecani sauce, if I remember correctly. That one's on us. That one's free. I think the premise being that you don't want to go with salsa made in New York City, but other things that are other things cooked up in New York City tend to work out just fine. And so we'll get into that in just a little bit. Did you start your day today with a healthy helping of Freedom Flakes? Is that how you started your breakfast today?
No, I started my day with a healthy helping of Costco salsa.
Oh, okay.
My salsa is made in Kirkland, Washington.
Jeez. No, that's the wrong answer. Joe McFarland, a buddy of ours, former radio broadcaster. Joe's at the Flames game over the weekend, and a lady behind him mutters, "Yeah, right," after 18,000 strong are singing the lyrics to "O Canada," including the True North Strong and Free. Says Joe in his tweet, "I bit my lip, but how can anyone standing in a crowd of 18,000 watching hockey be complaining about not being free?" What about Joe's tweet lit the fire in you?
Well, I'm sitting here, thinking I've been to a lot of Flames games, a lot of other games, and most people who are lucky enough to be able to afford a ticket to an NHL game generally have a fairly free life, generally a good life. I don't like to be one of those guests, and I don't think I'd be warming up the beautiful people of Alberta if I came on with a bunch of charts and graphs and public policy stuff. So I'm not going to do that. But we're one of the top performing economies in the world, have been for quite a long time. Did we take a few blips during COVID and a little bit after COVID? Absolutely. Are we as hot right now as the U.S. economy? No. But the idea that we're not economically free, and certainly that we're not free in every other way imaginable, is trash. I know people like to repeat this. This country used to be free, but not anymore. Well, how come you're getting to say that and you don't get treated like Alexei Navalny? I mean, for those of us who pay any attention to the news at all, we've got thousands of examples of countries that are not free and human beings that are not free. Canada ain't one of them.
Well, I don't understand, and maybe we're the wrong people to be having this conversation together, because we're probably going to see eye to eye on it, which will make it boring. I'll hop in the live chat to see if anybody wants to offer up an alternative perspective. I understand, I guess, during COVID, when some restaurants had to close for a while, rec centers had to close for a while, we were down to kind of the essential services. People had to wear masks if they wanted to go certain places or show vaccine passports for a brief period of time if they wanted to, attend movies or concerts or whatever. Feels like a lifetime ago. But none of that's in place anymore. So I don't really understand. I mean, unless there was a real freedom deficit before, then what the hell are we even talking about? What are people still bitching about? I don't know, but maybe I'm preaching to the choir with you.
Well, no, I mean, look, it's not that I don't hear it from people, and it's not that one of the reasons I responded to the tweet was I hear it from everyday Canadians. I do not want to create the impression that the people who say this stuff are just a bunch of nut bars or people who require help, and we naturally have to be sensitive to those people who require mental health, but that's not what this is about. And I don't want to turn this into one of those really, really stupid conversations. There are people who do all kinds of analysis on this stuff. There's a segment of the population, I don't know whether it's 1 in 5, 1 in 3, who are open to this idea that Canada is not as free as we used to be. I think part of it is, you talked about woke culture a little while ago with another one of Alberta's beautiful people living, I think, in the UK these days. And, people naturally respond to what is loosely called woke culture, where somebody is constantly telling you how to speak, what to say about certain things. That, I'm sure, makes some people feel that they're less free than they used to be in the country. But the complaints about our woke rules and some other things are really minor. And the idea that governments, federal and provincial, this is always perceived as some sort of federal thing. The provincial governments, in the case of Alberta, we're telling people they can't go to movies, can't hold funerals, in some cases can't hold church services. That was not a federal thing. But the point is that government wasn't doing that because the government wanted to turn Alberta into Russia, okay, or China, or North Korea. They were doing it for public health reasons. And I know that people, there's also a bunch of people who don't like the idea of doctors and scientists, telling people what to do because they see something on Facebook that gives them a different set of values. I mean, I get all of that. But the idea of isolating the public health crisis and saying that's the reason we're not free. As soon as the crisis abated, the theaters opened and you can have funerals and hospital visits and everything else. Why can we do that? Because we're a free country.
Kenzie is in our live chat and says people are jailed for handing out leaflets. Don't tell me we live in a free country. I mean, I don't even know what the hell Kenzie's talking about.
What is happening?
Maybe Kenzie can follow up. I mean, are your leaflets inciting hate speech? Like I've had people hand me leaflets of aborted babies in garbage cans.
Yeah.
They're not going to jail. What the fuck are you talking about? It's not even close. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. I understand that there's a grift happening, that people are still making good money on this, on banging this drum and whipping gullible people into a frenzy. Theo Fleury, Jamie Saleh are among those right at the top of the list, convincing people that there's still a freedom issue in Canada. I mean, you can walk right up to the prime minister. You can walk right up to premiers. Everyone's going to, point out the one Rebel News guy that was arrested for trying to, chest bump an RCMP officer. A little too big for his britches there. But for the most part, you can do whatever the hell you want in Canada. You can come and go freely. I mean, there's kind of these weird conspiracy theories around 15-minute cities, and people believe that the government's going to be putting fences up around their neighborhoods. But I mean, if you honestly believe all this stuff, you're willfully ignorant. You're purposefully ignoring information around what 15-minute cities are. You're convincing yourself somehow that health measures are still in place relating to a pandemic that was downgraded to an endemic quite some time ago. I mean, I laugh. I laughed when I saw your tweet. I laugh when I hear people muttering during the national anthem that they're not free. But I am curious to know what it is that still makes these people tick.
Ryan, I don't mean to speak in your behalf, and if I trespass, if I'm over the line, I know that you'll stop me, because you never fear.
I'll speak freely,
disagreeing
pal.
with
Speak
yours
freely.
truly. So here it is. If Ryan Jespersen and I were only about the money, if we didn't care about our families, if we didn't care about our family name, if we didn't have any values at all, if we were capital M mercenary, only about the money, Ryan Jespersen and I would be doing dog and pony shows all across Alberta, all across Western Canada, all across Central Canada, all across Eastern Canada, talking about ourselves and our former careers as talk radio hosts and success stories and blah, 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 and tell this big yarn about how unfree we are. And that's why we're not doing what we used to do, because we've been shut down, and the Canadian people are being shut down in a multitude of ways. There's no bloody way that if Ryan Jespersen and I were only about the filthy lucre, only about the almighty buck, that he and I couldn't make a major grift. I'm talking about many millions of dollars lying to Canadians. But we don't do that. And I would suggest to you that those people who do are all about the money and the power.
Johnny and I have been considering about taking this show in a completely different direction.
Yeah, I mean, if we wanted the money, we could just come on here every day and be like,
lizard people, hey?
Driving to work, I saw the chemtrails and
It's unbelievable.
crazy world out there.
This fluoride in our water and all this kind of stuff. So, Charles, I mean, I don't know how much of an advance heads up you want when we change the direction of the show. There, it's going to be it's going to be a bit shocking for the audience. But there is I had a buddy. I think I told you this off camera, so to speak. A friend of mine who I respect very much, and he came up to me, and our kids play hockey, and he was talking about some of the other podcasts that are out there and some of the other shows and the things they talk about, and he said to me, do you ever think, does it ever occur to you that if you were to get just a little more crazy, you could 10x your audience? And I said, have I ever thought about it? I mean, obviously, I've thought about it. There's a huge audience for that. Some people on our live chat are saying some folks just need to be, that's James, some folks just need to be victims. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's it. I don't know. Maybe it was just life was comfortable when everybody got to complain that their freedoms were being taken away. And now that the freedoms are back, it's just now the onus is back on them. Now they're experiencing something called personal responsibility, and it makes people feel uncomfortable.
I appreciate the fact that you've said to the audience that you do think about it. We could do a Trudeau here. Trudeau over the weekend was talking to CBC French, and the people took a whole bunch of stuff out of context. They claimed that he said he was bored with the gig. We could talk about that, but one of the things he said that nobody disputed was he said he thinks about quitting the job every day. There are many people who think about quitting their jobs every day, especially those people who are making money on telling lies. Every now and then their conscience gets to them. In some cases, I know this for a fact, it gets to them every day, and they get involved in various kinds of addictions and other things to distract themselves from the fact that they are lying to their audiences and manipulating their audiences every day for the money. So, Ryan, if you want to give me a heads up on the idea of just, going to the top of the money Mount Everest by telling people lies, just give me a bit of a heads up and give me a chance to please talk you down, because honest to God, there are things that are larger than numbers. There are things that are larger than dollars. And I personally don't think that you and your family are suffering by being 100% real and honest with Johnny and everyone else participating in this.
I think I might lose Johnny if we take it in that direction.
I'll just state right now, I'll be the first to climb Money Mount Everest if it ever becomes a reality.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, there's bonuses every Friday. Travis says, when criticism feels like your freedom is being impinged, it's time to go outside and touch grass. I like that. Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of people talking about conspiracy theories. Tracy says they're funny. They can be entertaining.
I was going to say that.
She says, but that's not why you have viewers. Please don't change your content. We're not being serious, of course, here. We believe that there's a role for reputable, fact-checked, reasonable, normal conversation, and we promise to stick there. You in a way, Chuck, I'm not going to say that this was prompted by the talk about freedom and Joe's experience at the hockey game, but your column just a couple of days ago, just on Saturday, people can read it at winnipegfreepress.com, politics and the perception of decline. You quote who could be the president of the United States again, Donald Trump, who on March 12th, mid last week, stated, our nation is failing. We're a nation in serious decline. We've never had a situation like this where we're not respected. Trump says a lot. What was it about this statement that prompted a column from you?
Well, because it ties into so much of the stuff that I do here. When people say they're upset with crime in their communities, and this is an article that I wrote, a column I wrote for the Winnipeg Free Press, and there are a number of communities inside Winnipeg that are decaying. I mean, there's social decay, there's cultural decay, it's drug addiction, it's crime. It's all the same things that happen in Alberta's capital, no different. And when people see stuff like that, they want to draw a conclusion, not because it makes them happy, but because their hometown has significantly deteriorated. And so they respond to that message that Trump offers, that Poilievre offers, and others, that the country is in decline and they want their community back, they want their country back. And that was the thrust of the piece, to help people understand that obviously if you take a look at the large metrics, all of the opportunities that have been created, all of the jobs that have been created, et cetera, you can easily make the case that both the United States and Canada are on the incline, not the decline. But if you focus on certain issues, like you cannot take a walk down your own street because there are needles everywhere, and you cannot do certain things like trust the fact that your car won't be ripped off because there are thieves everywhere. If you look at those basics of life and come to the conclusion that your community is gone and it's never coming back, you can fall into despair and respond to that message. And I'd be a liar. I'm not here to lie. We've been talking about telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The truth is there are many people in this country responding to the message. Not the freedom message is one thing. We talked about that. We can joke about that. But the idea that we have some societal decline going on, that's absolutely true.
100%.
Depending on where you live and depending on your personal experience, you can be extremely open to that message.
Yeah, and I don't want to draw a direct line to this next story I want to ask you about. And don't worry, we are going to get to the the interview you have to expect. I'm going to ask you about Justin Trudeau. Now, maybe it's lost in translation. Basically said he's bored with the job, but I don't know. I want to ask you about that because that kind of knocked me back on my heels. But first, Pierre Poilievre, in my mind, has been doing a very good job, a very effective job, capitalizing on the affordability crisis in Canada. Basically, it doesn't take a genius to understand that most people are having a really difficult time wrapping their minds around increased costs on everything, whether that's natural gas and power or groceries or car insurance or tuition or like you name it. everything costs more, and the rate of inflation is more as well. We can't just simply say, well, everything's always cost more over the years. There's something new and different and troubling happening right now, and obviously people are looking to different levels of government, in particular federal governments, to do what they can. And with, Trudeau, the criticism has been just inflation, of course, coined by Pierre Poilievre. But there was an interesting exchange over the past few days. Premiers across the country, not all of them, but many of them, have been critical and growing more critical of the carbon tax, especially with an increase in that carbon tax looming. And I guess Pierre Poilievre perhaps thought he might have an unlikely bedfellow, an unlikely teammate with BC's Premier David Eby, who ultimately told him to pound Bologna. You want to go into this story?
I mean, David Eby was asked to sign on with other premiers the idea of not raising the carbon tax, which I guess will amount to 0.3 cents, 3 cents a liter on April 1st, on April Fools. And Poilievre wanted Eby to sign off on asking the Prime Minister to just cut it out, no increase. And of course, Eby's looking at the books, and the books say that if there's no increase, that also robs people in his province in British Columbia of a lot of rebate money. And people have been getting a lot of rebate money. And so Eby just feels that is just another element of Poilievre's digital campaign, which he calls a campaign of baloney. And he called it baloney. And of course, Poilievre responded with, well, David Eby, David Eby's insensitive to all of the people in British Columbia, his constituents, who can't even afford bologna. Now, look,
I thought that was a great line, by the way. Great line, by the way.
It is a great line.
Credit where it's due.
I don't mind people saying that. Unfortunately, in this country, just as I talked about certain neighborhoods, unfortunately, there are some people who have trouble, making enough money to feed themselves. That is horrible. That is unfortunate. But I would say to generalize, to basically say that David Eby's constituents, that the people of British Columbia in general, are having a hard time feeding themselves, that is baloney. That is absolute baloney. And I'd say the same about Alberta and Manitoba and the rest of the country. We are one of the richest countries in the world. Do we have a problem with poverty? Yes. All countries in the world have a poverty problem, and we have a poverty problem as well. But in general, this is a middle-class society. This is an opportunity society. And I would hate to live in a society where everyone is bummed out and feeling hopeless because political manipulators with their manipulative baloney are getting to them.
So are you cynical that, like, when it comes down to it at the end of the day, you think that Pierre Poilievre can convince the majority of Canadians that he's a more strident poverty fighter than the Prime Minister? Or I mean, obviously, I know that Justin Trudeau's not campaigning with Jagmeet Singh or whoever is going to be leading those two parties into the next election. But can Pierre Poilievre convince Canadians he's the poverty fighter?
Every time I've done a roundtable, I've done many roundtables over the years with an NDPer, a Conservative, and a Liberal, and every time it's always been the NDPer that has done a big thing about poverty. Jack Layton, I mean, Jack Layton was one of my best friends, and he couldn't, speak a sentence without using the word poverty. He pushed that button all the time. The point is that all of these roundtables, generally it was the NDPer pushing the button, and the Liberal would try to be a little bit conciliatory, and the Conservative was either cold to it or simply not wanting to play the game, felt that the NDP was just exploiting people. I guess I'm being a traditional Conservative. It just feels like exploitation. But the idea, in general, the idea that Pierre Poilievre is worried about poor people, and the idea that Pierre Poilievre wants to involve himself in poverty programs, and that's what the new Conservative Party is all about. Sorry, I don't buy it. Conservatives aren't wired that way. The old ones weren't, neither are the new ones.
Before we run out of time, I got to ask you about this interview. It's now the interview is done in French. My French is barely passable, so I'm not going to offer translations. But Canada's Prime Minister, in an interview with Alex Cascanet with Radio Canada, says he frequently thinks about leaving his crazy job, but plans to stay on through another election, as he confirmed February 21st in his interview with us. Says he obviously is aware of polls showing he's increasingly unpopular among Canadians, talked about the personal sacrifices of the job. The fact that he, over that 24-minute interview, suggested that he thinks every day about leaving really struck me. He did also say, though, translated to English, I could not be the man I am and abandon the fight at this point. But here's the quote. I think about quitting every day. It's a crazy job I'm doing, making the personal sacrifices. Of course, it's super tough. It's very challenging at times. Does he get points for candor? Or is this something that, I don't know. I'm just trying to think if the CEO of a company or the captain of a hockey team or the lead singer of a band about to go on a world tour says, I think about quitting every single day. How's that going to land with the 35 million people, 40 million people living here?
Well, certainly the people who don't want, there's a huge percentage of people in this audience right now that wants change. I understand that.
Sure.
People want change, especially after a decade. They want change in all countries, including the blessed one that we're fortunate enough to be living in. But when the CEO of the government of Canada says he thinks about quitting every day, those people who want change naturally respond with, well, then why don't you just quit right now? He is being extremely candid. Does he get points for being extremely candid? Unfortunately, in the world that we live in, when a politician is absolutely lying his sack off, then, we say what we ordinarily say. The guy is a typical lying politician. When a politician tells the whole truth, we second guess him. He probably does think about quitting every day. But I just ask you, Ryan, just Canadian to Canadian, if you were having the constant security threats, the constant bashing, poll after poll every hour saying, not only will you be losing, the Liberals will end up with just a rump, 50, 60 seats. They'll be slightly ahead of the NDP. If you're getting that kind of data coming at you every hour, don't you think about quitting every day? Don't you ask yourself, maybe the best thing I could do for this party is to walk away. Maybe I don't need this for my life. Maybe it is a serious distraction. Maybe it does get, in the way of my family. Obviously, he's undergoing a separation with his wife. He's got children that he loves very much, as all people do. And it's natural to be asking your question, maybe there's something better I could do for my family and my life than this particular gig, which so many people seem to want to either take away from me or they're constantly telling me to walk in the snow.
Everything you're saying is reasonable.
Wouldn't you be thinking about quitting every day?
Well, sure, everything you're saying is reasonable. Everything you're saying makes sense. The only thing that doesn't make sense is saying it in front of a microphone to the people of Canada. That's the only part that doesn't make sense. I talked about, like, if the CEO or the captain of the hockey team or the lead singer of the band, what if it's your spouse? Like, what if your spouse says, I think about this marriage is challenging. I think about leaving every day, but that's not the type of person I am, so I'm not going to. Whoa.
It's not, we talk about teams playing during the regular season, and then we talk about them getting ready for the playoffs, and, they've really got to strap it on in the playoffs, because that's when hockey really becomes hockey with a lot of hard hitting, and the teams that don't know how to hit don't know how to win a Stanley Cup. So if you're asking me, was it a Stanley Cup move to say on microphone, I'm thinking about quitting every day? I would say no. That's a not quite ready for the playoffs kind of move. And I highly doubt that Justin Trudeau is sitting somewhere in the world feeling very, very satisfied that he admitted that. I think it was candor. I think it was brutal honesty. But in this business, you get punished for that.
Yeah. I respect vulnerability. I love candor. I love when people say what they think. My favorite moment of that Trudeau interview was when he got fired up. It took him a while, right? Like we opened with a sort of a punch, a little rabbit punch between the eyes. Yeah. Told him the pollsters are predicting a bloodbath. He didn't really bite on that, but I could tell the punch landed. And then I said, you're Mr. Personality, you're Mr. Nice Guy. It's not working anymore. That's got to get in your... So we're just planting these little seeds in the interview, planting the seeds. And then about 15 minutes in, he comes alive. And that's when he says, oil companies are fooling people. The Alberta government is fooling. And that's where I'm going, yes. That's the 30 seconds of the interview that you want, because that's what's going to make 150,000 people download the interview. But at that same time, you realize that with that candor and with that outspokenness and with that honesty comes the consequence of the honesty, which is why so many politicians are boring and not honest in interviews, because they understand the ramifications of what they say. And I just have to believe that if even 1 or 2% of voters, I mean, even if, and again, like polling right now, we're so far away from an election, but the polling right now is like, it's like, you know, if the Edmonton Oilers are playing against my beer league team type prognostication. I mean, like, it's like, you know, the Liberals are going to get pumped.
I saw a poll the other day that said the Liberals would be, if there was an election right now, Liberals would be down to 64 seats.
64. Like right now, they're saying
nothing.
Pierre Poilievre could, again, haven't gone to the polls, take it for what it's worth, which is nothing. It's worth the paper it's written on. But they're saying it could be an historic majority. So if that's the case, and if that's what you're looking at, and if your team's trying to prepare to try to turn that tide, I just think it's kind of an interesting move. If even 1 or 2% of voters are turned off by you saying you think about leaving every day, then why would you ever say it? Maybe it's just a candid moment. Maybe it was an off-the-cuff kind of a thing.
Here's the thing. He was feeling very comfortable in that interview. And as you know, because that's part of your job, I mean, you tend to sometimes lather people up a little bit, comfort them so they can get a little bit loose.
So they spill the beans.
And spill the beans. So that's something. So I think right now you're just a little ticked off that he didn't do this with you a couple of weeks ago, because you would have killed for that moment. What would you have done? Let me just interview you for a moment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ryan Jespersen, successful broadcaster, podcaster, and great human being that you
thanks,
are.
Charles. Thank you.
If Justin Trudeau, during that interview with you a couple of weeks ago, had said to you that he thinks about quitting every day, what would Ryan Jespersen have said?
I would have said, what sort of a message do you think that sends to Canadians? Simple question.
Why wasn't that question asked during that Radio Canada interview?
Yeah, I don't know.
Because they're not as good as you are, my friend.
Oh, thanks, Chuck. Thanks. I appreciate that. Hey, before we go, did you catch our conversation with Premier Danielle Smith last week?
Yeah.
Did you happen to see it? Oh, your voice just dropped. What did you think about it? Be honest.
Well, I just felt she was throwing a lot of baloney around, and I was just thinking, it's too bad this is only a 30-minute interview, because if it was longer than 30 minutes, if it was 60 minutes, or Fantasyland, 90 minutes, I think my friend Brian would have had a chance to drill down on some of the stuff she was saying. I was particularly unhappy with her attitude about the hospitals. The hospital problem is a serious problem. We've got a situation right now where some people are being discharged who still have medical needs from hospitals. They need personal care, and some of the personal care is being taken care of in hotels, which means it's not being taken care of, which means Alberta's population is booming for all of the reasons I talk about all the time. Alberta's got the best growth opportunities in the country. People are moving to Alberta from everywhere. We need more hospitals. We need more hospital space. And so her response about, well, let's build this Stollery thing, and when the Stollery thing is done, then we'll take a look at it. I just thought to myself, my God, what a horrible, horrible answer to a very, very important issue.
Yeah, for people that didn't catch it, that was near the end of the interview. I was asking her about the South Edmonton Hospital, the plans that were canceled there. And if anybody knows, I mean, I know we have audience, outside Alberta as well, but you can think about the major cities. But in particular, Calgary got its big, they call it the South Campus, just a stunning hospital, unbelievable. You can see that thing like as far away as you can see the Rocky Mountains. I'm only half exaggerating. I mean, it's like unbelievable. But the south of Calgary desperately needed that. You look at where those cities are growing, and you look at how Edmonton's growing. If you maybe don't care because you don't live anywhere near Edmonton, you'll care when Stars Air Ambulance arrives for somebody you love and has to take them to a trauma center that's 80 years old or that's decrepit or dilapidated or not built out. South Edmonton desperately needs that hospital. Premier saying the estimates on that, I had a comment on it, but $4.9 billion. I have a hard time believing we can't build a hospital for less than $5 billion. But the challenging part about that interview, I thought, was, you've got a half an hour with the Premier. We got literally hundreds of emails from people.
Yeah.
We opened it up for questions and remarkable ones. I did a whole episode the day before we talked to Premier just reading people's emails because the emails are so good and there's preamble and background and you don't want to just deliver those one-line zingers. You want to give these people's messages, their plights, their feelings, their circumstances, the light of day. Want their fellow Albertans, their fellow Canadians to hear what they're experiencing. But we came out of that exercise with like 30 questions for her, right? And it's always a challenging one. I'm curious to pick your brain on this. Like, for example, we talk about Alberta's environmental liabilities. And she says in the interview, well, she's seen data that suggests that Alberta's orphan wells problem is about a $30 billion problem. Martin Olshinsky and other researchers out of the University of Calgary who we've spoken with have estimated that it's a minimum of, $65, $70 billion. I've seen numbers as high as $250 billion, $260 billion. So there's different numbers out there, but when the premier says 30 billion, I know a lot of people were like up in arms about that. They wanted to drill down on that. And you could spend half an hour talking to Danielle Smith about R-Star, her proposal, the work that she's done for oil and gas companies, her time as president of Alberta Enterprise Group. It's all relevant. But like that's 30 minutes. You know what I mean? If you're bringing the premier on to talk about orphan wells for 30 minutes, you can do it. And we'll do it with other expert voices and tons of background, and we'll spend 30 minutes on it. But if you also want to talk to her about trans kids and healthcare and no income tax cuts and the power grid and the wind and solar moratorium and it's kind of a tough road to hoe. And sometimes I wonder if, we talk about omnibus bills, omnibus announcements from governments, maybe an omnibus interview with the sitting premier or a sitting prime minister is the wrong move. The audience on some hands, I think, respects and appreciates hearing from a Canadian premier on 15 different things. But you also got the impression from some pretty loud critics, by the way, like some people you'd thought that I brought Adolf Hitler on the show, honestly, just seem to want more on one particular issue. And of course, it's the one issue that they care about the most, right? Any time spent on issues other than their issue is a waste of time.
But I mean, when, you brought up something, then she brought up about why are people in Alberta paying ridiculous rates for power, ridiculous rates for car insurance? And then she goes into this riff about Notley canceling coal, and because coal was canceled, that's why power rates are ridiculous. You've got a lot of experts on, whether they're left, right, middle, whatever, on why power rates are large. And power rates are large primarily because of the concentration of power. And without getting into a whole bunch of policy wonking here about capitalism, when you've got a plutocracy, when you've got a concentration of power in the marketplace, a virtual monopoly, that virtual monopoly has pricing power, which means they can charge whatever they want. So it's got nothing to, on the margins, it may have something to do with Notley's decision about coal, but that's a tinkle in the ocean. And of course, that has nothing to do with why auto insurance premiums are higher in Alberta than anywhere. So for her to slough it off as, well, Notley did something about coal, and that's why we got this problem. I mean, the nicest thing I could say about that is that it's arrogant, but it's beyond arrogant. It's duplicitous, and it's worth drilling down on.
Charles Adler is an Emmy award-winning talk radio legend, joins us the first episode of every week, and for that we are forever grateful. Good to see you, buddy.
Thank you so much.
You can follow Chuck on Twitter at Charles Adler. I like that. So you're down either way, Johnny. We're going to do the Money Mount Everest.
Yeah.
Tomorrow's show will
talk about chemtrails.
Maybe you got to do like, do you ease slowly into the conspiracy
dive
show, or do you just hard start?
You got to go right in the deep end. But
just one day.
I like how there was a few comments in here saying, conspiracy theories are kind of fun. They're funny. I agree. I think we need them because if you think about it, like we need to be challenged to think, and they do challenge us. Like I'm thinking about stuff that we really need to, like JFK assassination, things like that, where we know there's something wrong, right?
Like we didn't really land on the moon.
No, not that one.
By we, I mean our neighbors to the south.
There's some crazy ones, flat Earth and all that, but like.
Sometimes they're not funny. Like they're not funny if it's like Hillary Clinton.
No,
and
I didn't
friends.
mean funny,
but I'm just saying, like, Pizzagate, right? Clinton and their
those
friends are abusing kids in the basement of a pizza joint, and then some guy shows up with an AR-15 at a pizza joint to liberate kids.
Yeah.
Like that's when it's not funny.
I think the term ridiculous would be better. They're just so ridiculous, but they do challenge us to think, and we need that. But like when you're talking about stuff like chemtrails. Like, there's evidence that shows that's not real. But more than evidence, just have common sense. If people were flooding the skies with poison, there'd be pilots. There'd be people making the chemicals. There'd be people making and installing this machinery on planes, and there'd be thousands of people across just our country alone employed doing this. No one ever snap a picture of any of this equipment. No one would ever de facto, like open up
Of course, there
you know what I
would be
mean?
a whistleblower.
There would be a whistleblower. There would be something about it, right? But it's still it still challenges us to think, so we need them, right?
Bunny Slippers is saying, I wonder how many litter boxes are in classrooms right now, rolling my eyes. That was another one. Remember that people believe that kids were identifying as cats, and so there were litter boxes in all the classrooms. What about this one from Cactus Sheriff, who references a New York Times feature, by the way. You can read this back. It was in, I think it was December of 21 at New York Times, nytimes.com. Birds aren't real. The Gen Z conspiracy theory.
This one was great.
The birds aren't real movement, which is that birds are actually drones operated by the U.S. government, which is among my favorite conspiracy theories.
It was a great one.
But here's the thing. It's only a conspiracy theory if you don't believe it. If you believe it, it's not a conspiracy theory. If you believe
truth
it,
to you?
well, it's a theory. It's a theory if you believe it. It's a conspiracy theory if you don't believe it.
Yeah. And I like the stuff on Trudeau you were talking about too. I mean, I agree with Charles. It's just a candid moment where it's like, I agree with you as well, though. Don't be saying that when you're going to run in an election, even though it's far away. It's not giving people, any comfort when you say that when you're the leader of a country. At the same time, I think everyone knows if you've been leader this long, like, why isn't all his hair gray yet? I have no idea why. Maybe he's dyeing it, but like, you're stressed every day. It must be. It's the best job and the worst job. Right?
I can also understand saying, like, I mean, there's a million things a month that come out of my mouth that, taken out of context, even that right there, a million things a month come out of my mouth. I mean, that taken out of context would be funny. But if you don't have the context, or if you take a sentence as a standalone statement and then splash it up on a headline or a billboard, I think about quitting, or I think about leaving every day.
This job drives me crazy.
It doesn't instill confidence. But if you hear it in the broader context of a guy whose marriage has fallen apart, a guy who's obviously, I mean, people, now that he's not here anymore, we can tell you about his security detail to a certain degree. It is nuts.
It is insane.
I mean, like, there were, we won't get into too much detail, but like 7 SUVs, 25 personnel, RCMP, dogs, heavily armed protection. Like, when the Prime Minister was here in our studio, we were not allowed to announce ahead of time. We could tell you that we were talking to him. We couldn't tell you that it was in studio. The RCMP do 3 or 4, including the morning of, 4 visits in advance.
That's no joke.
You recognize and understand that the level of that job is at a higher level than anybody else. It's a level you're starting to now talk about world leaders, presidents, prime ministers, and that sort of thing. And I bet after a while, I mean, even just the comments, there's about 11, last I checked, there's about 1,100 comments on our YouTube episode featuring the Prime Minister. That's February 21st. The tweets, the comments on our TikTok, the comments on our Instagram, some of those comments, one of them a friend of mine made, and I reached out to him. This is a very rare thing for us to do. As a matter of fact, I think we've done it. We can count it on one hand. I deleted his comment.
Okay.
And I reached out to my buddy and I said, pal, like, you need to understand, a comment like that will prompt a visit from the RCMP to your home. Like, you can't be leaving, the types of things people say, the types of comments that people make. I know my buddy's not a violent person. I know he thinks it's funny. I know he was probably hoping for 300 likes on his comment. But at the same time, you recognize, like, people that are putting themselves into those types of jobs, I recognize why you'd have days when you wake up and say, life would have been so much easier if I just became a chartered accountant.
100%, or stayed in teaching. But I had the same thing. I had a friend, I posted a picture with him. Like, he's the leader of the country. I don't agree with everything he does, but I'm going to post a picture saying I was, next to the guy. He was polite, whatever. But, I had a friend just message back to the photo. Did you punch him in the face?
Yeah,
I would have. I'm like, and this is the stuff he deals with every day. But again, like, when he says, this job makes me go crazy, I get it. He can't, think about if you post photos of your kids all the time when you're doing whatever.
Yeah, we had to
when
talk
Justin
about
Trudeau
that.
does it, they tear his children apart. And those are like innocent kids. So it's like everything about that job is just every day. I don't think he looks at Twitter or anything like that. I think he has a
There's
team who
not a
just shows him
chance.
the positive ones. And
or not even that. But yeah, there's no, like, Justin Trudeau's not reading his own mentions
not
on
at
Twitter. You know what I mean? They don't even think. It's been fascinating. You know, we have you hear from a lot of people on this show. You know, our insiders, right? Our group chat roundtable is an example. The campaign managers, people behind the scenes, and they'll tell you that during political campaigns, the candidates are not allowed to check their own phones.
Oh, really?
Like, they do not allow them. And maybe some campaigns may differ, but I think as a general rule, campaign managers, like, you don't have the candidates reading the comments on the tweets and the Instagram posts. Number one, you don't need those banging around in their heads. Number two, you need them focused, right? You need them focused on the task at hand. And since when did the comments section ever change anyone's life in a positive sense? The answer's got to be never. Erin Davis is going to be joining us in just a second. She's literally just back from New York City. She was there participating as a delegate at a very high-profile United Nations commission. She's going to talk to us all about that. The UN Commission, the 68th session of the Commission of the Status of Women. Fascinating stuff. Erin was going to join us on our International Women's Day roundtable on the 8th of March, but guess what? She was on her way to New York City, so now she's back. We're excited to talk to her. Before we get to her, I have a big announcement to make, and it's so exciting for me to let you know that our friends at Friesen Brothers have confirmed that their West Edmonton location, that's for those of you that live in or around Edmonton on 142nd Street, 107th Avenue in the traffic circle there. I know you've been watching this construction project unfold. Everybody wondering, what's going in there? What's going up there? And then that sign went up and we all lost our minds because we could finally talk about the 17th location for Friesen Brothers. It opens April 12th, everybody. That's April 12th. Friesen Brothers West Edmonton location opens up. Obviously, we'll take you inside. I'll be shooting some videos, some photos, but more than anything, just get your butt in there yourself. I had a chance to tour it last week. Not everything installed yet, but they've got their sourdough sandwich station ready to go. They've got a beautiful Forno pizza kitchen, a wine bar, and their butcher shop is going to blow your mind. They're aging beef right there in store. I asked company president Doug Loveson, I said, hey, how long would you age beef for? He goes, well, how long do you want me to age beef for? I said, would you age it for 90 days? And his eyes lit up, and we realized the sky's the limit. Friesen Brothers, Alberta-grown, Alberta-owned, West Edmonton, opening April 12th. If you're looking at getting organized, if you're looking at decluttering this year, and you're ready to do it as part of a spring cleaning mandate, today's the perfect day to request a free consultation. You got nothing to lose with California Closets. You can find the link online to request that free consultation at californiaclosets.ca. That's where you can learn more about their approach. You have a conversation with their designers, understand how their installers work. We're talking custom closets, systems, and solutions for the entire home, the garage included. Don't ignore your storage room, your laundry room, that unused potential extra bedroom downstairs could double as a home office. California Closets would love to show you what they can do. Again, the consultation's free at californiaclosets.ca. Our friends at Apex Automation have a message for Canada's skilled engineers. If you're a PEng, or even maybe one making their way through engineering school right now, soon you'll be entering the job market. You owe it to yourself to take 5 minutes or less to check out apexautomation.ca. You can learn more about what they're doing in fabrication, automation, engineering, Industry 4.0, plus the careers link, where you can learn more about what they're doing culture-wise, where people like you can do your best work. If you're ready to grow your career, challenge yourself, and learn new skills, you're going to want to take yourself to apexautomation.ca. And if you're maybe a step or two away from entering the job market, you've still got some schooling to do, take a second today and check out athabascau.ca. For thousands and thousands of Canadians, Athabasca University is the best fit because it's not a brick and mortar location you got to travel to. It's not a 9 to 5 post-secondary schedule you got to give up everything else for. If you've got kids or a full-time or a part-time job, maybe a parent you're caring for, maybe a situation that requires flexibility, AU will be a perfect fit. Again, you can learn about the AU advantage by visiting athabascau.ca. Erin Davis was last on Real Talk, joining us in studio as a member of a panel, a Real Talk roundtable discussing a project called the Magazine Club. She's an award-winning expert, an inspirational speaker, and a global thought leader in the field of diversity and inclusion. She is literally just back from New York City, where she was participating as a delegate at the 68th session of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. So very cool, and welcome back, Erin. It's nice to see your face.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Yeah, how did you wind up getting involved with this? Doesn't get any bigger than the UN.
Yeah, so it's an interesting story, as is everything. I had the opportunity, and actually this is a great chance for me to give a shout out to a friend of mine who introduced me to someone who was involved with an organization called BPW Canada. It's the Canadian Federation for Business and Professional Women, and through that conversation, BPW actually has delegate status with the United Nations. So they provide 20 individuals to go out to New York every year to be part of the commission. It's an application process, and I put in an application.
So cool.
Yes, so cool.
I was pretty proud during my university years to be a delegate at a model United Nations, and I know how exciting it was just to pretend like
Yes.
we were going to hang out at the UN. What was it like for you? You arrive in I think what most people would acknowledge to be the greatest city in the world.
It is, yes.
You're arriving at this institution. You see there the infrastructure of it, and I would imagine it starts to hit you in waves, the magnitude of what it is you're participating in.
Totally. It didn't set in until the morning I walked into the United Nations. You stand in line, you have your delegate pass, but not till you walk through those doors and you're in the room that all of a sudden you start to feel like this is real. I'm part of these global conversations, specifically on gender equality, and I honestly am still processing the fact that I was there.
So it's still running until
is.
March 22nd, so it'll be running until the Friday. It's the UN's largest annual gathering on gender equality and women's empowerment under the priority theme this year, accelerating the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls by addressing poverty and strengthening institutions and financing with a gender perspective. All about funds, or at least in large part.
Yeah, I think so. There's this element of the work I do every single day, and I work with a lot of organizations and understand what their barriers are to creating more diverse and inclusive spaces. But then you take this to a global level and you start to think about poverty, and you think about that in nations where women and girls don't have access, and their rights, their basic human rights, have been stripped from them. And when we talk about financing, there was many speakers talking about women. The one story I remember really well is women in rural India who don't have access to funds, where one woman wanted the opportunity to have a job so she could buy a bike, so she could ride it to school, so she could become educated and then start that pathway for building her life.
Barrier.
Absolutely. And then you think about, coming back to Edmonton and what are the challenges that we face, and it gives you perspective on that. But then I have to sit here and go, okay, but how do I relate this to the people in my communities to say, why should we care? Why should we wake up every single day? I'm reflecting even on your conversation you had this morning on freedom. How do we think beyond ourselves? I think that's, for me, one of the pieces that we need to start to challenge ourselves. Yes, it's about our own success. Yes, it's about how we are living our own lives, but we're part of a global community, and if we're not contributing to making the world a better place, I don't know why are we getting up in the morning?
Can I dig in? Can I
Yes,
circle
do it.
back on the
Yes.
freedom thing? Because
Yeah,
absolutely. I brought that up to almost just in kind of a cheeky way, because to me, I tried not to approach too many conversations on the show where my mind is made up. But on this one, my mind is made up. I'm not concerned about the freedoms that Canadians do or do not have. How about a perspective check? I mean, tell us about some of the things that you heard. What does maybe a lack of actual freedom look like? I'm sure it's still fresh in your mind.
Oh, absolutely. there was a session I attended on women's rights in Afghanistan, which are no rights. And this has been an issue since August of 2021, when the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan, and we see the Taliban move in, and we see women and girls not having access to anything. So that's a real lack of freedom, where they, their voice wasn't at the United Nations because they can't leave their country.
Yeah.
They can't get a visa to actually come over to the U.S. to be part of that conversation. And a whole dialogue around what does it mean to be a refugee, where you have to, every day you wake up and you're thinking, how am I going to survive? How am I going to live my life? Like, that to me is a lack of freedom, and that's not something that we have to face.
Yeah, no kidding. So you're gathered there with dozens, hundreds of people?
Over 10,000 delegates.
Over 10,000 delegates. And at the end of the day, so March 22nd, when this thing wraps, there'll obviously be some takeaways from here.
Yeah.
Was there one that you left from when you're flying out of JFK and you're on your way back to Alberta and you go, this is a way where your perspective has been significantly or demonstrably changed?
I don't know if it's demonstratively changed, but the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, who has now been added to my list. You know how I think that we get a list of like 10 people that we would have dinner with if we could make that happen.
10. I like the way you roll. Most people limit it to 3. I like 10.
No, 10. Like, how could you choose 3? That's
3's impossible. Yeah.
So 10 people. He's on the list. Just the way that he spoke. He's a former politician from Portugal. Portugal has a pretty special place in my heart too. So found a really great connection to the way that he spoke and the way that he talked about gender equality. I don't know if this is really controversial, but like, I don't always hear men's voices as loud as women's voices when we talk about gender equality. So to have him, standing in front of the room talking about change that we need to see, he said, let's be bold. There are resolutions put forward through these conversations over the 2 weeks. How can we start to look at changing policy? And he was looking at the drafts that were present at the start of the 2 weeks, saying, no, be bold. And I think for me, that's the biggest takeaway, because I want to walk this line of understanding. Why do you have that perspective? Help me understand why you think that way. And so that can help me have a further conversation with you. And so to me, that means I maybe take in a little bit more perspective that I don't agree with. And maybe I don't come across as bold as necessary to make the changes that we need to see.
Interesting.
In our world.
You talk about this, you mentioned it before the show started. We were talking about a crucial poverty crossroad. And when you look at poverty rates around the world, globally, more than 10% of women, 10.3% of women live in what they describe as extreme poverty. Can we dig in just so there's like a fulsome understanding of what, like when we talk extreme poverty? Yeah. Like, and this is not intended to take anything away from anybody. No. Because there's a lot of people right now experiencing an affordability crisis right here in Canada, and it's very, 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 very difficult, and they're utilizing food banks and doing everything they can and all kinds of things. And we hear those stories all the time. So my mission here is not to compare or to take away from what someone in Canada might be experiencing, but what does extreme poverty that 1 in 10 women on planet Earth are experiencing, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I think the number was like less than $2 a day to live on. So you need to, how are you gaining access to housing? How are you gaining access to food? How are you gaining access to being able to live the life that many of us have the affordability to have every single day? So there's a conversation between the developed countries and the developing countries and how are funds actually allocated between the two, and is there a reallocation that we need to start to think about in terms of the billions, trillions of dollars that we see in developed countries, and the conversation of how can we be part of this global solution where women and girls, like, the data continues to be there. We give them access, the world becomes a better place.
Yeah, 100%.
So we need to think about this.
So this talk about accelerated progress is serious business, though, right? Because there's these sustainable development goals that we want to get to by 2030. Yep. We talk about 2030 like it's so far away.
I know, it's around the corner.
It's around the corner.
Yep.
And so to get there, to achieve these goals, and I think it's important to have goals with times on them.
Sure.
You know, I mean, I
agree
know the way
with
I
you,
operate, or
but
take it over.
How do we become become more bold with those goals, because those goals were talked about in 1995. We've had a really long time to work towards those. I also do work with Engineers Canada through APEGA, and there's a goal that Engineers Canada has to have 30% of women be graduate from engineering by 2030. So I tell that stat to people who aren't involved in engineering. They go, well, why isn't the goal 50%? And it's like, well, they started that goal in 2015, and that's how long it looks like it's going to take to get more women into engineering. So there's this huge lead time. And is that, I don't know, be bold. How can we be more aggressive with that? And they talked about that at the UN. Do we have to have quotas? People do not like that term.
No.
Do we need to have quotas to get more women and girls thinking about careers in STEM or STEAM, however you want to talk about it, and getting them, that gives them a trajectory to financing and gives them that connection to building a life in which they can contribute to the economy.
What's the A in STEAM? There's Arts.
Yes.
So it's science,
Look it up,
tech,
Ryan.
engineering, mathematics, right?
Yep.
So science, tech, engineering, arts, and mathematics.
And actually that picture that just came up, and maybe I'm not going to be able to quote this quite right. We went to listen to Global Women in Music. It was an opportunity for the conductor to be a woman. And all the pieces that were played, there was world premieres that night, all by women composers. So only 5% of concerts that are sort of played on a global scale are actually composed by women composers. So every single intersection that you can think about, there's change that's required. So the A in arts and really is about music. How important is that in our lives? Arts are so important. We sometimes see this separation of math and science is so important, but there's a huge component to that side of our brain and thinking about how arts can contribute to a better society.
I promise I want to get back to the world poverty stuff in a second.
Yes.
For sure. I mean, you and I, we can hang out as long as we want, but I don't know what the rest of your day looks like. We'll respect the time we asked for. But we have talked, as a matter of fact, quite recently on this show about, quote unquote, quotas, DEI initiatives, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's interesting. I think even we get great comments from our audience members. I just love this audience, and many will say it's important for people to see themselves represented, and it's important, and then other people will say, but it needs to be the best person for the job every time. I talked to Jackie Ray Greening. She's a very well known. She's a Hall of Fame broadcaster on the show. Where was she on, Johnny, around the Jason Greger controversy? Was that 4 months ago? Something like that?
3.5
ish, approximately, when they launched a new sports talk station. Didn't have any women anchors, but the PD, the program director, Jackie Ray, is a woman, and she came on and basically I knew that she was going to catch some shit for what she said, but I also really kind of respected the conviction with what she said it. And she's like, I just hire the best person for the job. You know, and she's like, if that's a woman, great. If it's not, great. And she didn't she seemed sort of nonplussed over the whole thing. So how do you wrap your mind around it? Because I think that when people start to view it as inclusion initiatives are the opposite or the antithesis of hiring the best candidate, then you inherently will have people opposed to them.
Yeah. Oh, we could talk all day about
Let's
this.
do
So there's this component of when we say who's the best candidate, it's based on our own biases of what determines what a best candidate is going to look like.
Sure.
And so are we pausing in that process to really understand who could, I will say, be additive to the organization? We also often hear people say, well, we got to find people who fit in. Well, if you fit in, then we're all kind of probably very similar, and then we're not really getting to a place of diversity because we all think the same and we all have the same ideas, and then we're not going to get better solutions. And so yes, of course we're going to hire the best person. I don't even know why that's up for contention or conversation. But what we need to really start thinking about is how are we looking for talent? How are we finding that best person? Are we going to our already established networks with people who we sort of have similar values with, share the same perspectives? Or are we really going out to say, actually, I can go and gain different additive perspectives from someone like this? And so this is where I'll probably conclude my thoughts for the UN is how do we be bold? If we do things the way that we've always done them, we're going to get the same outcomes that we've always had. And so I'm the proponent who's going to say, how can we think about things differently? And I've worked in several organizations where no one looks like me. And I don't work in those organizations anymore for a reason. I am independent now, and I have the opportunity to build out what my networks look like and have access to having conversations with people who are going to challenge me. And so I think that's where we need to shift the conversation to. Like, let's not keep repeating ourselves. We're going to hire the best person. Yeah, of course, you're going to hire the best candidate with those that you have in front of you. But how are you doing work to think differently about what that candidate pool looks like?
If people want to check out our episode, it was March 8th. That was International Women's Day. Julie Savard-Shaw joined us, Executive Director at the Canadian Prosperity Project. And she had some interesting, like their numbers, and they issue this annual report card on equity. Basically, they're looking at like boardrooms, C-suites, executives, and I was looking, at some of the numbers they present, and they're striking about, women in executive leadership, corporate leadership, and the numbers just aren't there. And then she goes, it was kind of this moment in the show where you can almost hear me gulp into my microphone. She goes, now let's look at Black and Indigenous women in executive leadership. Well, like under 1%. Yeah. And really, striking presentation there. If you missed our Real Talk Roundtable, you can find it obviously on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. March 8th. The episode is titled International Women's Day Calls to Action. We're hanging out with Erin Davis. You're the founder of Erin Davis Co. People can check out erindavisco.ca. Can I ask a personal question? Yeah. Like, can you tell us about your own journey, your personal journey, and how you got started as a DEI expert? Was it based on a negative personal experience like you just alluded to? Yeah.
Well, I'm a pretty positive person, so I won't say it was a negative, fully negative experience, but it's actually very interesting. It was an invitation to sit at a table to talk about diversity and inclusion like 15 years ago. Wow. I was like, what is diversity and inclusion? I had no idea. I was just sort of humming along in my career.
What were you doing for a job at that time?
At that time, I was working in the utilities industry, and I was doing regulatory work, and then I ultimately moved into strategic planning. Okay. And so I thought that's where my career was going to be headed. And classic, I just need to work really hard, and I'll continue to excel in my career. Right. But I really sort of reached a ceiling, and I wasn't sort of moving up into middle management. There was no sort of career pathing to that executive level. And so when I got the invitation to sit at the diversity and inclusion table, I said, of course, because I'm a very curious person. What is this all about? And that really started the journey, because I started to read all these research reports similar to what the Prosperity Project was talking about, and saying, oh, we have an underrepresentation of women. Oh, it's not just about putting your head down and working really hard. There's unconscious biases that happen in terms of who are we hiring, who are we promoting. And so that really started the journey for me, ultimately leading diversity and inclusion at a pretty big organization here in the city that had 22,000 people across the world, and saying, how can we sort of affect change? And I'll do another shout out. Sort of chatted with my husband last night about this, because within my own career path and how, my journey has been, he's been in, I'm laughing because he worked at a coal plant. Okay. The conversation you had earlier in the show. And he
wait. Why are you laughing?
Because he was potentially going to lose his job. Because
I see what you're saying.
Coal is more complex than natural gas.
We're not anti-coal.
No. That's not what I meant. Just saying, like, a decision was made by the government, and so he was potentially going to have to make a decision. And so that decision ultimately led him to now being the stay-at-home parent. And so there's been this huge shift in our household and what care support looks like, and what that world, and we talk about it all the time because it's very different than a lot of other households. And so this D&I journey, he jokes and says, well, did we just like swap sort of the traditional roles in our house because we still need someone at home to help take care of our kids? But it's been a really amazing journey to see how we're sort of like challenging those gender stereotypes within our own household and going like, actually, it's really important for us to figure out what's the best thing for our family, what's the best thing for our kids. And so when he left his job, he was talking to, some of his coworkers, and they really didn't, why would you leave your job? Why would you, walk away from all this money? And it's like, well, no, we're thinking about this holistically.
Well, why would she leave her job?
Yeah, totally. Right. Yeah. Right. And so I think for us all to start to challenge some of those stereotypes, and that's what I get to do every single day in my job now, which I've sort of created for myself, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, two of my best friends in the world are stay-at-home dads, and their wives are both remarkable professionals. Working in education and healthcare, and it's been neat. I mean, I can think of even a recent conversation. It was a quick one, but we were playing on the ODR. We're skating, playing hockey outside, and these two guys are meeting for the first time. Sport bringing people together. And the first question you ask somebody, if you're not talking about the weather, what do you do?
Yeah.
And my one buddy Michael says, I'm a stay-at-home dad. And the other guy goes, cool. And then he had like a couple of questions for him. Well, what did you used to do? Did you always want to do that? And it was really neat to hear it. Just like a normal conversation. Yeah. And there's no reason why it shouldn't be normal. But it does, like the attitudes. It's so funny. This is such a dumb example for me. This is so stupid for me to even bring this up. But it's like we're so hardwired. I drink white wine more often than red. My wife drinks red wine more often than white. And even when we go out to restaurants, the server always puts the white wine in front of her. I'm like, it's the tiniest little thing. Yeah. But it's
those biases.
It's the tiniest little thing. But we laugh like almost every time. Yeah. Because it's just from that level all the way up. Yes. Let me ask you about this. By the way, I noticed you said D and I.
Oh, yes. Okay.
You didn't say DEI. Johnny and I were just talking about this. You eliminated. Was it subconscious? You eliminated equity.
Okay, don't quote me that I eliminated equity. And so when I started in this space 15 years ago, it was diversity and inclusion. So my programming, my default is D&I. And I can tell you the whole journey on this because when I was at that organization, we switched it to I and D because we wanted to create inclusive spaces before we start to bring different levels of diversity in. Because if the organization doesn't have an inclusive culture, then those people will leave. With the news of George Floyd in 2020, we really started to highlight equity in workplaces. And then I start to see some organizations bringing in A, which is accessibility, which we haven't talked about, but was a big topic at the United Nations as well, is how are we thinking about people with disabilities and their access to things around our world, let alone from a design perspective. How are people with different disabilities navigating the world? But it's often a conversation that gets missed in the boardroom. So when you talk about these numbers in terms of representation, there's probably a low percentage of people with disabilities sitting in the boardroom. And the reason I say probably is because they don't have to self-disclose at this point. It's their choice whether or not they share that.
So we don't know the statistics exactly.
Not fully, no.
I see.
Yeah.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to Erin Davis. You can check out what she does at erindavisco.ca. Your website is super slick, by the way.
Thank you.
It. No, that's really good.
So those photos were taken in New York last summer. So
nice.
It is the best city in the world.
Nice drop there. You're just rubbing it in that none of us get to go to New York as much as you
got to create the opportunities, Ryan.
You've earned it. You've earned it. I want to get into this, and we will bring it back to this United Nations assignment that you were on. But Elizabeth here in our YouTube live chat says the oil patch is one of the worst for sexual intimidation. Elizabeth says that from a decade of working in it as a boots on the ground.
Yes.
For more than 10 years. So shout out to Elizabeth and thank you for sharing that. And then an interesting question here. Akat says, well, not so much a question, but says getting more women graduating from engineering programs is great. But what's the plan for workforce retention?
Yes.
It says
totally.
under 27% of women, let's say 1 in 4 women engineers stay in engineering, according to a recent study. Which is a fascinating stat that I've not heard before.
Yeah, no, it's been a stat for a really long time. So I'm going to talk to both of those comments actually. So yeah, you see about 5 years into engineering, women leaving. So let's make sure that we understand they're not leaving the workforce. They're just leaving that part of the schooling they went to do, and they're leaving behind engineering. And so they may go on to work in different areas inside of organizations where they feel a sense of belonging, where they feel a sense of inclusion, where their ideas and their thoughts matter. And so I think that's a lot of the feedback that we hear back to this work that I do with APEGA is those work environments aren't inclusive for women. And so if they're having to go out on job sites, because if you're an engineer, you're not necessarily sitting in front of a computer every single day. Right. You're going out onto those job sites, which the other guests spoke about, boots on the ground and saying like the stereotypes are pretty high and pretty real. A lot of the issues, unfortunately, are about like access to bathrooms. So even if we want to just talk about access to women's washrooms, let alone just access to a bathroom, there aren't places for women to go to the bathroom. Not always is personal protective equipment readily available that fits women. And really, at the end of the day, how are we really saying and attracting women to come and work in these spaces? And I know that you are a big fan of the work that Women Building Futures does.
Yeah, I mentioned them the other day.
We love what they do. I want more organizations to get into this conversation, because when we talk back to financing, there's so many stories of women going into the trades. It's not 4 years like a degree where you wouldn't be working for that period of time, or potentially, having to raise your kids. You're going through programs that, for months, and then you're going to do your practicum. So you're going out and working and earning an income. So then you get access to that capital. And so I think there's so much opportunity. And when we talk about women in trades, it's about 4 to 5% overall of people who are in the trades that are women. And when you look at that by different types of trades, some of the numbers are like 1 to 2%.
Jeez.
And so there's huge growth, and it's a piece of work that I love to do. And I actually go out, this is hilarious. So I leave for Fox Creek, Alberta tomorrow. So shout out to anyone who knows where that is. That's on the way to Grand Prairie. And I go out there and I sit, in the field office and have conversations with them about diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
Now, do I push really hard on that language? No. We talk about psychological safety. When we show up to work, are we able to talk about the hardships that, if we go back to the pandemic, they didn't get to do their work from the computers in their homes. They had to go into work every single day with changing parameters and, really difficult times. And so can they talk about that strain that it had on them in a safe way when they come to work? And so it's been a really awesome journey talking to them, working on that inclusive space, so hopefully they can attract more women, doing work with Women Building Futures and other organizations to make sure that we can start to see those numbers changing.
It was like 10 years ago, Johnny, I'm showing this here on my screen. I interviewed the cast of a documentary. It came out, I think, 2013 now, Oil Sands Karaoke. And one of the cast members, these are real life people, they're not actors. She was, I wish I could remember her name off the top of my head, just an incredible woman. She operates the biggest truck on planet Earth.
Yeah, cool.
She drives the biggest truck on planet Earth, and she talked about that experience working up in Fort McMurray, but also how empowered she felt, and also like her attitude. What I remember from that interview is just she didn't think it was a big deal. Like she wanted to see more women and girls, more women in particular on the job site, obviously of age, but there's a lot of things that stand in the way. I appreciate conversations like this because you never know that somebody listening to this, they're a super on a job site or they're the chairperson or something like that, and they could make these tiny little tweaks to open up so many different doors and completely change and improve the dynamic of their company. I'm not surprised that you and I don't want to describe this as a tangent. It's something that deserves our focus and our time. But we are talking about, your role as a delegate at the United Nations at the Commission for the Status of Women. Erin Davis, our guest. And I wanted to bring this back. There's data from almost 50 developing countries that shows that there needs to be a major global investment in women and girls. Yeah. They're talking about a third of $1 trillion, $360 billion. It's a huge number, but can we talk about, and obviously you could give us a million examples, maybe a few key ones where an investment, perhaps from the developed world, could go a huge way in empowering women and girls around the world, creating opportunity and ultimately making a better world for everybody. What would be an example?
Okay, well, we'll think through some examples. I mean, the one that was pretty prevalent in my mind, this one's huge, and I mean, I don't know if we can make a phone call to make this happen today. It's very political, but how much money do we spend on war? Right? And
trillions.
And so where are our decision points on that investment, and which one has a better outcome? And so there's ones at massive scales, but there was another conversation that I attended that talked about period poverty, which to be honest with you, is not something that I think about every single day. But in developing countries, there's not access to period products. And so I think there's like a small investment that could be made to help to support women and girls in that journey. And so they have access. If they're in war-torn countries, how are they getting access to those basic human needs? And
access to birth control is probably another one, right?
And absolutely. And who's paying for that? Who's supporting that? Who's funding that? Is that up to the individual? If they don't have any money, how are they getting access to that? And I didn't. This wasn't the thing that I knew a lot about, but it wasn't until 2015 that we, as Canada, removed the tax on tampons. And there's still 20 states in the U.S. that still have a tax on period products, where you could have an argument, well, this is like a basic human need.
Yeah.
And so why are we taxing that? You can look up the pink tax. The great example is there, those I can't remember if we're allowed to swear.
You can say whatever the fuck you want.
So, those really shitty erasers that Bic sells, there's the pink ones and the blue ones. Well, the blue ones are cheaper than the pink, but they're still the same product. So why are we charging more on that? And maybe I'll relate it back to the individual, because I think that's where people can walk away and go, okay, what's the difference that I'm making? So sure, it can be through your dollars, but it can also be through your voice. Who are you having conversations with? Who are you, yes, you're making comments on here, but can we continue that conversation into talking to our MLAs, talking to people within community who can start to create those changes. So I'm trying to think of some other examples, but access to education, this is huge.
Access to education is massive.
Huge.
I speak often of an assignment that I was on, heading over to Ethiopia with a group out of Westlock, Alberta, called Rainbow for the Future, and heading to one of the poorest parts of planet Earth, the Horn of Africa, and the Afar region in Ethiopia, and it was a huge, my world was rocked the entire time I was there. And ever since. And understanding that, there are a lot of things that are happening with young girls. I know it's uncomfortable for people to talk about things like genital mutilation. The way that girls are treated and promised as brides and young brides, denied education, denied property rights, denied loans, microfinancing.
We're not talking about millions of dollars. We're talking about small amounts that can change their lives.
In this part of Ethiopia, I know for some women, it was like, 2 women I remember were loaned, I think it was the equivalent of like $80. And it allowed, it enabled them to get like 3 goats and something else from which they started their business. And then by the time we had seen them, they had the loan, they paid the loan back right away.
Absolutely.
And then
women,
they had this little storefront and their faces are beaming. And it was, and I remember, just feeling chills talking to them through
There's
translators.
This huge community-centric component to giving women and girls access to money, because they think about it from most holistically, think about it from a community-based perspective. And so we heard that at the UN, you make this small investment, you give them the micro loan, and then all of a sudden, like the snowball effect, they're changing the world. They some of them aren't educated, right? But they understand money. They understand the value of the sale of goods. And so if they can gain access to a little bit of financing, it goes such a long way.
Such a long way. I'm right now searching. These are YouTube stories that I have not checked out for years and years and years, but you can find them on YouTube. One of our episodes, the Alberta Advantage. This wasn't necessarily the microfinancing one, but just showing some of the job opportunities that were becoming available in this part of Ethiopia. This was a health clinic, as a matter of fact, optometry, and these were old donated frames. And anyway, I digress. I could talk about this all day. Just really remarkable stuff. One of the things I want to make sure we touch on before we go is that there is ROI here as well.
Absolutely.
Like, you don't want people to think that there's no return on investment when you start talking about global partners, nations investing tens or hundreds of billions of dollars into these types of initiatives. The GDP bumps that you see are massive.
So had the opportunity to hear a lot of the Nordic countries talk about some of the policy changes they have made and the impacts on GDP. So they have done a lot of work and policy change around childcare. And what that looks like in terms of getting both men and women into that caregiving role for a period of time. Universal childcare. How are we thinking about the institutions that are, raising our kids and part of our kids' lives? And so all of that policy change that has happened over many, many years has impacted in returns to their GDP. So the evidence is there.
So cool. I just want to thank you for your availability here. And, and I feel like this is a conversation that is probably going to prompt more questions than it answers, which is the best kind of interview.
Absolutely.
And so thank you for making time for us on the heels back. I know that you and Johnny both basically came from the airport to here. So we appreciate that. If you want to learn more about what Erin does, you can check out erindavisco.ca. And I am going to link to my story. It's 14 years old. It's called Women in Wealth. Shot that in Ethiopia. You'll see a young, spry me telling that story. So, these stories, once you understand the significance of them, once you understand the magnitude of the challenges, in this case, global poverty, and I'm grateful to you for putting that on our radar, you understand it's something that all of us can do something about.
Totally. And let's be bold about it, right? Because you're saying this story was from 14 years ago, and then I kind of go, well, have we made any progress? We have, but the progress is slow. And so I actually am glad that we, had the opportunity to have the conversation today and not on International Women's Day, because it's not just a March 8th conversation. It's an everyday conversation. And how can we continue to drive change?
Beautifully said. Erin Davis, thanks for making time for us.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Hang tight here. I'm about to read an email. I think you might want to. This is kind of cool. This is out of left field, but just a really beautiful one. Positive reflections coming up in just a quick second. But first, I want to let you know that these conversations are presented by Real Talk partners like our friends at Eden Landscaping. They've been bringing outdoor spaces to life for more than 20 years, and they'd love to do the same for you. If you want to get your front yard, backyard, or both done this spring or summer, now's the time to get in touch with Mike and his team so they can get the conversation started, get the design going, they get your approval on budget, and then the next thing you know, it's shovels in the ground. We worked with them last summer to get our backyard turned around just in time for fall, which means this is going to be our first spring with these new Japanese lilacs. I can't wait. It's going to be all over my Instagram. Just you wait. If you have your own vision and you'd love to see what Eden Landscaping can do with it, we encourage you to work with them, starting with a conversation prompted at landscapeedmonton.ca. That's Eden Landscaping. On the flip side, we have partners, sponsors that hope that you never call them, hope that you never have to. And that includes Complete Care Restoration. As a matter of fact, they're the only ones. That's because they're in the business of fire and flood recovery. Obviously, nobody wants to see that happen, but if your community is impacted, could be a backed up sewer line, a burst pipe, could be spring flooding from runoff, wildfire, or otherwise. Heck, maybe you've just found some black mold or asbestos as part of a renovation project. Leave it to the talented professionals, the professional property restoration experts at Complete Care Restoration. You'll find them online at completecarerestoration.ca. Our friends at Kuby Renewable Energy every week give us a chance to focus on something positive, something that edifies us, something that fills our bucket. It's a tradition that we call Positive Reflections. And this is intended to be a chance to step outside of the news cycle in a way, and this one's a little bit different. As we step away from the negativity, I want to take on some tough subject matter here for a second, and I want to remind you about something that we focused on quite some time ago. This is a serious story. It's about as serious as it gets, but there's an email that I think is going to make an impact. Do you remember back in December, a number of months ago, Jaskrat Singh Sidhu was up for a deportation hearing. This is the guy that caused the Humboldt Broncos bus crash. Remember that? He pleaded guilty. He didn't contest the charges. He was sentenced. He did his time. It was interesting to see of the nearly 3,000 of you that voted, you voted to let him stay. 84% of you said let him stay. Well, I received an email, but guess what? And I'm going to go full disclosure on this. It's from my dad. And my mom finally asked me, did you get the email from your dad about Jaskrat Singh Sidhu? And I said, what? And she said, well, it sent it to you, and they sent it to my other email address that I wasn't checking. And then I finally got this email, and it's amazing. He wrote it in January, but I think that the principle still holds true, and it felt like a positive reflection to me. So this from my dad, Dr. Bruce Jespersen, who says, Ryan, the results of your yes or no ear to the ground poll that you aired on a December episode of Real Talk concerning the fate of the driver of that deadly Humboldt crash are clear enough. Also surprising, 3,000, give or take, of your audience members, when asked, believe or at least feel what Canada, what we should do with this young immigrant man, Jaskrat Singh Sidhu, having served his prison time for arguably the most egregious individual act in our country's history, killing or maiming a busload of young local hockey heroes, the man, a rookie, at the wheel of a loaded semi-trailer, thundering fatefully across the flat Hallison prairie land laid out before him toward the day that will live in infamy. He gave no defense. He confessed his guilt. He was contrite through the due process that brought him to justice and jail, where he served his full sentence. He wants to remain here. The possibility itself bespeaks the nature of our country, but what should we do? Of your poll, 85% would have him stay. 15% would deport him home to India to whatever may await. I thought the question would be more hotly contested, given the sheer magnitude of the tragedy. No amount of sympathy and support will ever replace the lost loved ones, nor, for that matter, reverse events, so as to relieve the tortured remorse that must greet that man every day for the rest of his life, as though it were a virtual incarceration. Yet something else is afoot in the psyches of your listeners and viewers, of Real Talkers who answered that poll. It shapes the debate as to what justice is and what kind of society we aspire ours to be. I'm referring to grace, forgiveness, and hope. Says my dad, count me in with the 85%. I love it. I don't care that email was written 2-3 months ago. The principle holds true. Grace, forgiveness, and hope. How will that apply to your week? Let's walk with it. Let's think about it. And if it makes an impact on you, like that poll did on my dad, send us an email to talk@ryanjespersen.com and let us know. My thanks to our guests today, Erin Davis, Charles Adler. Coming up tomorrow, Andrea Heinz. What happens when men pay for sex? More Real Talk right here. We'll see you then.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jespersen. Executive producer Josh Dunford. Technical producer John Hicks. General manager Katie Cook-Chivers. Account coordinator Lawrence Derlego.